the presentation I'm going to share with you is the work we did with the GNI Plus Climate Policy Initiative in Seattle, and also a number of other institutions where we were demonstrating on the potential of tracking climate finance. We wanted to know where it comes from, where it is going. Are we meeting our PA agreements and also other national instruments? So this is me. Do a number of things, but just see the purpose of this truly was to see how, together with the CPI, which we were partnering with, see how we can help a country like Kenya to demonstrate the flow of climate finance into the country and also where it goes. The work was led by us, and we started from the global landscape of climate finance since 2012, which the CPI has been tracking. And if you can see the spaghetti, you can see the national by then was getting about 132 billion from the bilaterals, 16 billion US dollars, multilateral $46 billion, and of that, only about 2B was climate finance. So the perspective of this was to link what is happening from outside and also look at how we can enhance this by increasing the source and the money that can flow in. And we also looked at the landscape for energy access for climate finance under the SE's Energy for All since 2017, the landscape of the renewable energy by ERENA, and then also IDF. And then we see how those tools which have been used in Germany, Indonesia, Ivory Coast, and South Africa can also be applied so that we have a global or a national perspective on how we can account for this. But the good thing with this presentation is that we've used where it has happened, but as at now, ours in Kenya is the latest because we released it in March, a few months ago. Maybe other countries have also released their numbers soon, but we still new in the home. You can see the number of counties where it has the landscape has been done. Colombia, Cote d'Ivoire, Czech, DRC, France, Kenya. So this the data we have is always used with tracking climate finance. The benefits are immense. Number one, we are monitoring. We also evaluating we undertake the evaluation of where this money is, and also to reporting in line with the Paris Agreement, Article 9, and also Paris Agreement, Article 7, where money flows is required. And it is also very important to know that we are preparing for the reporting by 2024 as required under the Paris Agreement. The key is to increase the transparency, accountability, and trust among the relevant stakeholders, and the stakeholders and those people who are providing money. The beneficiaries of this money, climate finance, need to know where is it coming from, how much was it used for intended purposes. It is also to inform the international and national reporting requirements under the common template approach under the transparency and accountability as we're moving in. But the key for ministries like ministries of planning and finance, where I come from, it is very important to use this tracking for planning, because in public sector resource allocation, you need to plan within the medium term and expenditure frameworks, and then you need to budget resources that are required to respond to sectors that are sensitive to climate change. And of course, you need to create awareness among the citizens that the government and the development partners and the key partners are doing something on responding to the change, and understand also the nature and the magnitude of both domestic in Kenya here and international climate finance, and then also to create a baseline of climate finance flows and measures against it. Then when it comes to resources mobilization, we need huge capital outlay to respond to the impact of climate change as a basis for cross-sectoral and also government and government donor relationship and discussion. As just been said by the last presenter, that we are preparing for the Conference of Parties COP26 in Glasgow under very difficult circumstances where COVID also is likely to change a number of things. So this reporting mechanism, and based on the money that was promised that will be mobilized up to, for example, $100 billion up to 2020. And then from 2020 now, we were supposed to scale up the commitments. And they have been talking about increasing ambition. So the increasing ambition requires numbers and also to show where those numbers are going. And of course, the Sub-Saharan Africa is now number 19. We are still the latest because we just took one financial year to see what was going on into the country. So we've used the land use finance tool, which was developed, as I've mentioned there, and there are several modules that are embedded within the data, the scoping and the mapping, then the stakeholder engagement, building definitions, which we had already done in our climate finance policy, and then we are setting the mapping, which we had with the stakeholders that we did. So it moves until now. We had the data analysis and the results. And when you look at all this, it also embedded the other communications that have been there, which is indicating the challenges that are facing climate change, climate finance flows, and also the source. And the good thing with this, if you look at the routers, if you look at the blue bag, it's just said global investment in cutting greenhouse gases fell by 11% in 2018. But this is very, very true if it is in 2018. But this year, when the IPPC released their sixth assessment report, then where they said that the global is warming or burning, and we are narrowing the window for the response, then this report is in response to that we are worse today than worse. And it is across the board. If you look at the team that are supposed to we work with, 69% of the UK emission dropped nicely, but the global renewable investment still remains. So these are just highlights that shows that the problem is still there, and the climate finance claims, but the problem is still not solved yet. So more need to be done, more ambition needs to be taken in. So I've just talked about the scope and what we have done. I don't want to involve very much on that. But when you look at the key thing here is the central government. The data which was used here was provided by the National Treasury and Planning, where the NDA sit, where we work. Then all the budget for the line ministries, which we sit, which we capture in our IFMIS, Information Financial Management System. And then we also have the subnational government, then the special agency. So this is the boundary condition through which the work was done. Then the data collection was through the public finance management, where we have the domestic, where we have the national budget, and then we have the sub-counties, which we have the 47 of them, which is very, very important, because now there is a requirement that the climate finance needs to flow down or to where the climate change impacts are, and that is at the local level. And we used Rio markers in our methodology, which we developed to indicate, to define the climate change parameters. This is very, very important based on the OECD DAC credit reporting, reporting system. We've also involved the sources. Within the domestic sources, we also involved the Kenya Private Sector Association, because we also want to know significant amount of money also come from the private sector, the NGOs. So we had to consolidate all this information so that we have a data that is capturing the private sector, the public sector, the civil society organization, and also the development partner where it comes from. The sectors which were covered are only sectors that are representative and responding to climate change, because both adaptation and mitigation. And if you look at the relevance, they are all captured in this indicator: energy, transport, enabling environment, food and nutrition. So these are the sectors that we capture in our National Climate Change Action Plan. They are also the sectors recommended mainstreamed within the MTEP program. But there are quite a number of challenges. The data in many developing countries, East Africa and Kenya, there are challenges of coverage in terms of data for both public and private sector. Land use and also adaptation, then you have to reconcile those data. Then there are areas where the reporting and using different reporting templates, also limited description within the FMI system, because this one was the first one after we've already developed our. So all this moving, and if you see the graph on your left or right hand side, depending on where you are, you see the key sectors that are tracked fully. Energy was tracked fully because a lot of resources have been going to the energy, and they're very specific. If it is solar, wind, geothermal, they are very clear. So there is no gray areas. Then when you go to sectors, subsectors like transport, manufacturing, forestry, wildlife, tourism, food, and nutrition, then they were simply partially tracked because the data which was available was partial. You could not get a whole sector coverage. And then when you go to the disaster risk management, water also, those are also partially captured. But all in all, we got something to, the findings were something to talk about today. So when you look at this spaghetti, which was generated based on that data, so it is now very clear that we have the sources, we have the intermediaries, and then we have the instruments, and then we have the climate change sector, because we wanted to align this reporting with the Paris Agreement and, for example, the requirement of the Green Climate Fund, also other development. So during the period under review, which were being tracked, the government revenues which were taken into, which were flowing into the climate change sagas was about Kenya shillings 33.7 billion. And then that one, within the national budget, we had the total, which is combined the special agencies, government agencies, which is 35. And then both totaling to about 56 billion. And then from the exchequer, that one we also segregated, because now that is from the government and what we get in. We exchequer the one from the public sector and also the debt. Now the debt that has been borrowed and used within the climate to respond to climate change in those sectors, we count them as Kenya government contribution, not the lender, because this is the money that will be taken back to the lender even in 50 years. So those are counted broadly as the resources that the government is putting into addressing our adaptation, mitigation, and cross-cutting. And when you look at that, then we also have, in terms of the amount, bilateral DFIs and donors 43.5%, multilateral donors, DFI, direct financial institutions, and fund 32.1%. Now, when you put both those, including the Kenyan, the banks that must have been borrowed, which is 24.5%, so you get the portion of the exchequer. Debt is about 70, then the grant is about 34. But where did this money go? Then the money which moved only about 15.1% was grant. The rest of the amount of the money was from the taxpayers' money and also the debt, both of them. And then there is a whole small amount of money which is unknown, because as I said before, that it could not be tracked as a private sector or from the source. They are the money coming through diffused system. Then we have the Kenyan banks, then we have the private sector, then we have the philanthropics, and also the international investors, what they put in terms of equity or their own funds. Then we have adaptation, which was taking only 28%, approximately 28%, then cross-cutting 20%, then mitigation was taking the bulk of it. And if you look at the sectors as provided for, we have the disaster risk, we have the transport, water, and blue economy, and energy still took the bulk of the investment, as I said. So this spaghetti and this flow shows us what flown in 1 year. As we are moving on to track the 2019-2020, we may be able to get a better data. In summary, there was about 2.4 billion billion US dollars that flowed as climate-related investment in that year alone. And now within that 2.4 billion, from the domestic sources, we had 28.3, about 28% was from the public sources. Only 14% of that money was from the private sector. So it means that the public sector in Kenya is still financing or meeting a lot of climate change related compared to the private sector. But globally, and if you look at that, it is also that most of the response for the mitigation are business related, and there is need for the private sector to come in. So when you look at the total overall, about 59% of the total money that are moving in from both domestic and international investment from the private sector, which is also the private sector only total about 40%. So we are still ahead. And then when you go into international, also about 30%, 31% is from the public international, and about 27 from the private sector. So international private sector are doing better than the local private sector. These are the areas that we need to look at. Now, but this one was still very less than what we had in our upgraded NDC, which requires about 62 billion US dollars per year up to 2010, of which 28%. So because of time, let me just run very quickly. You look at the figures here in investment needed to implement our NDC. Energy alone, we need between up to 2030. We need a very, very significant amount of money within the energy sector alone. So you look at water, we have the figures up to manufacturing, which we require between 2019 to 2020. So energy requires the most, followed by water and green economy, and then the agriculture, food security, and also the disaster risk, because as the climate is, the disaster from climate change is increasing, then we need also more of that. Then what is the need according to the national determined contribution versus climate finance? It simply means that if you look at what we require by the NDC, which is almost over 100 billion Kenyan shillings equivalent, then we still move in a number of sectors. So you find climate needs are less than the private sector, and the figures are huge disparities. So it means we need more resources from outside than is needed. Let me just say that about 80% of climate finance in Kenya was directed to the implementation of climate mitigation. 80%, 79.8, 79.8. That is more or less 80%. So only 20% was directed to both cross-cutting and adaptation. And our priority as a country which is affected by climate change is adaptation. So the challenge is that more money is going to the mitigation, yet the priority is adaptation as required. So these are what we are going to deal with and work with in the whatever. So within the energy sector, renewable energy generation projects attracted more than 66%, the largest. The rest had got very limited, attracted very limited resources. Yet there are also other types of energy that need to be removed, or other sectors like transmission, energy efficiency, and also waste. Adaptation investment, significant resources went to water and wastewater management. Agriculture, forestry, land use, a full sector also got very little, because this is where the livelihood support systems are. Even the disaster did not attract much. So it's key to see how can we turn this table going forward, given that the impacts are increasing significantly. We did a narrative and we calculated of the $75.9 billion, so 31% of climate-related expenditure was channeled through the national budget. So that it's easier to move in from that. And we have the figures, and it has characterized and analyzed up to where they went, where they came from. For example, the philanthropic 0.3%, project developers, that. So this shows the depth of the analysis, which gives us confidence when we want to move in. But the good thing is, again, that the government itself disbursed that amount, and this is how on allocation, development expenditure, and we went down up to the amount that has been used in terms of carrying it out. And then we also, in the development, we also characterize with non-climate and climate related. So you see that non-climate, the ones which were not bordering cross-cutting, were more. Activities that were taken through this during the mitigation related is mitigation 50%, adaptation 20%, cross-cutting 20%. So this is more or less 50-50. There are a lot of other things that I think, because of time, I may not get into details. I may respond to them in terms of questions, etc., so that the entire region or the entire IGAD region needs such kind of information, so that we can be able to have an informed information, enable us to be ready to report, and also to design projects that are bankable, projects that are implementable, build the capacity, review or develop requisite necessary policy framework so that we increase the flow of climate finance resources into the country in response to our NDC as upgraded and also in readiness for the net zero carbon balance by 2050. Colleagues, I don't know whether the time is still there, but I could stop here if the time is over. Linda.
That is good. You can answer some questions. I think we still have time to answer one question each before we run out of time for the webinar. Oh, you have a few questions actually. I think there's a number of questions that are in the Q&A. There's a lot of engagement. If you're in the part of the audience, please feel free to go through the Q&A. Peter, do you have a few more slides that you want to finish?
Of course, but is time okay?
I can give you 2 more minutes to wrap up.
I think 2 more minutes. Let me respond. I respond to them through the question Q&A so that we can also have the water because time. Yeah.